The following is a segment from the Carl King Podcast. If you enjoy this show, be sure to like, subscribe, and send us burritos. Up next, we have The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension from 1984. Written by Earl Mac Rauch, and directed by W.D. Richter. Or was it Richter? Richter and Rauch. We'll go with Richter. Anyway, W.D. Richter happened to be the writer of, Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1978, and also Big Trouble in Little China from 1986. Playing the starring role of Buckaroo Banzai himself was Peter Weller, the dude who went on to play RoboCop just 3 years later. There was also John Lithgow, Christopher Lloyd, and of course Jeff L. Goldblum, before that whole shameful public scandal. Folks, this film is nutty. In fact, it is so original I can't think of anything quite like it. It is truly an anomaly in its complexity and in its genre. I have to wonder, going back to 1983 or 1984, what was the context in which this movie was produced? Like, how did they get away with making this odd mixture of high and low budget? And why did a studio agree to this? And what did they all think they were making? Well, here's how it all got started, and try to follow this. According to Wikipedia, the director, W.D. Richter, liked a novel written in 1974 by a guy named Earl Mac Rauch. So years later, the director convinced that writer to move out to Los Angeles, and he paid the writer, who had never professionally written a screenplay, $1,500 to develop it. And somehow in the middle of all of this, the producer of all the Rocky movies, Irwin Winkler, got involved and paid the writer's rent for 6 months. Well, they made the movie on a $17 million budget, which would equate to $48 million in 2022. So it wasn't exactly a low-budget production. I just think it's unbelievable that they were given that much money to make this thing. I can't imagine that anyone at the studio understood it. Unfortunately, the movie bombed at the box office and made less than half of its budget back. And the writer, Earl Mac Rauch, only wrote one movie after this one, which is a real bummer. Now back to some commentary. Here is something wild. They put a lot of detail into the background of the shots. For instance, John Lithgow has a pyramid of photos on his wall. There's a little photo of him on top of the pyramid that says me, and then all the rest of the people in the pyramid with an arrow that says everyone else. But you don't really see that unless you happen to pause the movie. And in that same scene, this stood out to me, there's a notable little moment where a butterfly net falls over, and John Lithgow completely stays in character and completes the scene. He doesn't turn to look and has no reaction. The production design was a big deal in Buckaroo Banzai because they went totally overboard. And part of that was complicating the characters. For instance, they had a president of the United States. Well, why not give him some more detail? They asked, well, what if the president has a bad back? Okay, sounds good, but let's take it to an extreme. We can put him in this big rotating device, a hospital bed that lifts up in the air and tilts very far forward, flipping him upside down to face the floor. Oh, and we'll have side mirrors from a car attached to it. And people have to squat down on the floor and talk up to him. It's like they came up with an idea and just kept piling onto it. Maybe nothing in the entire movie was normal. They crammed each set with background detail. There was junk piled up everywhere, and books, and fast food containers, cobbled together low-budget electronics and machines, and you can see all of the duct tape and cheap materials they used. In one scene, they even made high-tech goggles that look like they're made out of bubble wrap. And the characters are all like collectible action figures with unique costumes. For instance, Jeff L. Goldblum is dressed as a cowboy for some reason. I really didn't pick up on why. But they all have their own individual outrageous character themes like the Spice Girls or Kiss did. And the end credits are like a fashion show shot in the LA River. All the characters get together and strut along to dance music. And I wonder if that could have been an influence on James Gunn's Peacemaker opening credits. Maybe he saw that and took it to an extreme. And I also read that Life Aquatic borrowed that style for their end credits. Okay, so now we're down to the takeaways. Here is one filmmaking lesson I extracted from this thing. The trademark casual dialogue. Buckaroo Banzai contains so many sentences that have never been spoken before on Earth. There are far too many to name, but one that made me laugh was, "I'm barely holding my fudge right now." So if you're going to write dialogue, try to come up with ways to customize it. That is, if you want to make a movie as unusual as this one. But the bigger filmmaking lesson is possibly this. If you get a hold of tens of millions of dollars, be as imaginative as you can. Maybe don't make the same movie that someone else made before. Get away with making whatever the heck you want. I think what these guys did was put a point way over there on the map. Because no one's ever been there, and maybe that's where we want to go. So I gave this movie 5 stars on Letterboxd, because of course I did. If you enjoyed this segment from the Carl King podcast, remember, you can also listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or through an old rubber hose.